While Ralph Rene was investigating solar weather, a Mr. James A. McKinnon of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration sent Rene a copy of his document, NOAA Technical Memorandum ERL SCL 22, August 1972 Solar Activity and Related Geophysical Effects. The document included the forecast for solar activity prior to the Great Solar Flare of August 1972, and for obvious reasons, Rene jumped on them. As we look through these forecasts, remember, the August 1972 flare lasted between the days of August 2nd and August 9th, 1972. The sunspot itself was known as Region 331. On page 26 of this document, McKinnon states, "The activity from Region 331 was not covered in any long-range forecasts. This is illustrated from the following excerpts from the preliminary report and forecasts of solar geophysical data." The long-range forecasts issued on July 19th, 1972 stated, 27-day forecast for 20 July to 16 August 1972, no increase in solar activity is expected. On July 26, 2 long-range forecasts were issued. Forecasts for 27 July to 2nd August 1972, solar activity is expected to continue at a low level. The 27-day forecast for 27th July to 23 August 1972, solar activity will remain low. Finally, on August 2nd, the long-range forecast read, forecast for the 3rd to 9th of August 1972, solar activity is expected to remain at a low to moderate level. Class M events are expected from regions 319 and 331, with Class X possible from region 331. Just hours after this forecast was released, region 331 released its first major flare, even though all the long-range forecasts predicted only low solar activity on August 2nd, 1972. As McKinnon put it, the activity from region 331 was not covered in any long-range forecasts. In other words, this very colossal flare exploded without warning. Jay Windley knows this to be true, because by his own admission, he has read Rene's book. Clavis.org is totally devoid of these forecasts reprinted in NASA Mooned America, nor does Windley enlighten his readers on what was printed in the newspapers and magazines at the time. The August 21st, 1972 issue of Time reports, "With no forewarning, the Sun underwent a series of violent eruptions that caused some of the worst magnetic storms on Earth in recent years." The accurate forecasting of flare-ups is still what solar physicist Robert Noyes of the Harvard and Smithsonian Observatory calls very much a black art, a description that is fully supported by last week's dramatic and unexpected events on the Sun. On September 11th, 1972, Robert Noyes was published in the letters pages of Time. Although stating that the accuracy of these forecasts had improved enormously over the past few years, he stated, "It may be true that a sixth sense would be required to predict the precise moment of outburst of a solar explosion, just as a sense would be needed to predict the exact path of destruction traced by a terrestrial tornado." If the NOAA forecasts for August 1972 were an improvement to forecast accuracy, I'd hate to imagine how inaccurate they were before this improvement. Robert B. Doker, the chief forecaster at NOAA's Space Engineering Laboratory, had this to say to the Denver Post on August 11, 1972. Because this series of flares came when we passed the solar maximum activity, it was relatively unexpected. The New York Daily News carried the following report on August 8, 1972. Blast on the Sun is biggest yet and unexpected. The ninth and largest flare recorded in the last week of solar activity exploded on the surface of the Sun today in an unexpected display threatening communications and power in Earth's northern latitudes. Boulder Camera reported, NOAA scientists have been surprised by the current intensity of solar flares because they occur near the usual low point in the Sun's 11-year activity cycle. The August 11th printing of the Rocky Mountain News reported, actually, the current cycle is unusual. The flares were thought to have peaked in 1969 to 1970, and should have declined until 1974, when the current cycle ended. Instead, the recent gaseous explosions that began on August 2 have been larger than any in the cycle. The August 8 printing of the New York Times stated, the occurrence of solar eruptions at this stage in the 11-year cycle of sunspot activity was unexpected. As one official in Boulder put it, the occurrences were sort of like getting snow in Atlanta in July. The official in question was Robert Decker of NOAA. His exact quote was also featured in the August 9th printing of the Dayton Daily News, which reported, they have puzzled scientists because they occurred during a normally inactive period of the Sun's 11-year cycle. Decker was also featured in the New York Daily on the 8th of August, 1972. The cause of the flares, which started to burst last week, is a mystery. Robert Decker, chief of the Space Environmental Services Center, said the flares were occurring at what should be a low-activity period of the Sun's 11-year cycle. A spokesman for NOAA, called Ralph Segman, was featured in the Panama City, Florida News Herald on August 12, 1972. He said NOAA will be unable to determine if the activity consists of flares until it can see the area where it is occurring. And in the August 6 printing of Boulder Camera, Segman said the effect of the combined solar flare hadn't been determined, but, he added, the two storms occurring close together could cause more problems than had just the one occurred. And on August 11th, the New York Times reported, but most remarkable is the fact that this activity is out of season. The last period of maximum sunspot activity was in 1968, and another was not expected for several years. They also reported, this undependable behavior would bear on the safety of astronauts exploring Mars. They are likely to be sent on a voyage lasting more than a year at a time of sunspot minimum, but if they were outside their craft when a major flare occurred, they might be exposed to a severe dose of radiation. By far the most astonishing statement comes from David McLean of the Space Environmental Sciences Center at Boulder. In Science News, he was quoted as saying, quite bluntly, of course, nobody pays really strict attention to the cycle in predicting specific events. I could go on, but I think these newspaper clippings, together with NOAA's inaccurate forecasts, clearly demonstrate just how easy it is to predict major solar flares prior to their eruption. Given that Ralph, Rene, and myself can prove historically that NOAA ultimately failed to predict the legendary August 1972 flare, how could NASA possibly have been able to predict such high solar activity and subsequently postponed a moon flight in such an event? Indeed, the inability to detect an X-class solar flare before it occurs would be a great motivation for faking a manned flight to the moon.